Greetings, fellow Hyperboreans. Dave here, developer of the Hyperborea system for Foundry VTT, and bringing you a promised video on doing a little bit of a deep dive on creating magic items and some best practices on how to do that within the system to give them the various types of effects and abilities those magic items might have. And so we're going to go through a number of different item types and demonstrate how they might look, and be aware that there are in many cases different ways to skin the same cat. But what I'm going to just show you is the things that I have found that seem to work pretty well, what I would call best practices, at least from my perspective. So with that said, let's start with some easy stuff. So we'll talk, first of all, actually let me just back up just a half a step here. So as I said, there's different ways to do different types of magic items, and I think, in my mind at least, kind of the way to define how to go about or choose how to go about doing a given magic item is to ask yourself some questions about that item and what it needs to be able to do. So to start then, you might ask the simple question, does the item give itself one or more modifiers? And typically what I'm talking about is things like weapons and armor. You might have a +1 sword, +1 leather armor, whatever it happens to be, where it's giving itself a bonus on like attacks and damage with weapons, or bonus to AC and maybe even damage resistance in the case of armor. Those are the simplest of items to create because the capability is built right into them. So if we start with armor, because that's pretty simple, we'll just grab this chainmail here, ordinary chainmail. And for +1 or plus anything chainmail, actually the easiest thing to do, you're just going to adjust the AC. So +1 chainmail goes from an AC 5 to an AC 4. And if you want to apply an extra damage reduction, you might want to go from 1 to 2. And that's about it. And then I would just add, +1 to the name. There, now I've got +1 chainmail. And it was that easy, right? So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, undo those changes. 5 and 1. There we go. That's how I would do magic armor. It's that simple. When it comes to weapons, very similar again. If I just take and open up a weapon here and we'll grab a short bow. Short bow, we actually have these attack and damage mod fields. So this is where I can say if I've got a +1 short bow, I'm going to put +1 in both of those fields just like that. Now you could also, I don't know why you would, but you could actually leave that at 0 and just add the +1 to the damage like that. The downside to doing it this way is when you look at the way the damage is displayed in the chat, it's not going to reflect the attack with the bonus of the weapon. It's just going to show d6 +1 as base damage. So if I look at Artemisia, I think she might have a +1 bow. She does. So if we look at hers, it's already set up +1 and +1 like you would expect. So if she makes an attack with that, and we'll just, let's see, I don't worry about not having a target selected. We'll just make the attack. We'll make sure it's going to hit. And so when I look at this and I expand, you can click this to expand it down. You can see the item attack modifier is 1. That's +1, by the way. If it was a negative number, you'd have a minus there. But without any plus or minus, it's a plus. And then when I roll damage, you can see it's going to roll d6 +1. And when I expand this out, once again, the base damage is d6. The item damage modifier is +1. So that's why, if it's a +1 weapon, this makes it obvious where that +1's coming from. If I had just put +1 in the damage field, that is to say if I had just put +1 here and not here, then it would show as base damage 1d6 +1, and you would not see the item damage modifier, which can be a little bit confusing. So best practice is actually make use of the attack and damage modifier buttons in order to have those show up in the chat window when you expand it down and see where those values are coming from. So I hope that makes sense. I think it should be pretty straightforward for everybody. So that's the first type of magic item, really, is armor and weapons that just have that simple bonus. Of course, if the weapon has more stuff on it, we'll talk about that a little later, or armor. But just for the basic modifiers to their own abilities, just do it like that. Let's see. So the next question you might want to ask yourself is, does the item cause one or more active effects on its owner or on others? So what is an active effect? That's things like turning someone invisible, where it might actually be a token effect, or it could be a levitation or flying, where you can apply a token effect, but also just there's this implication that the player now knows their character is flying, or levitating, or invisible for that matter, if you're not using the token effect. The token effects are optional, but they're kind of fun to have, I think. And the system actually makes use of some of those, like invisible specifically, and also height. So if you're flying at a certain elevation, you actually do get a +1 bonus on your attacks on people who are lower than you in elevation. Invisibility, of course, applies penalties on someone attacking you, things like that. So, so that question then would be, as I said, does the item cause one or more active effects on its owner/wielder, or even on others? And then you could also ask yourself, this actually gets more complicated. There's kind of sub-questions. So first of all, is the active effect passive, meaning always on, while the item is equipped? As an example, you might have an item that applies a modifier to the wearer's fighting ability, or casting ability, or turning ability, or it might modify as like a bonus to their saving throws, or even to their attributes. And so the best practice for a case like this is to actually add the effect directly to the item with a checkbox to apply the effects to the actor. And then the Hyperborea system will actually handle enabling and disabling that effect when the item is equipped or unequipped. So what we can do is look at an example here, and let's see, does he already have that item on? He does not. Perfect, then I can put it on. So I have an item called Gauntlets of Ogre Power. So if we look at Gauntlets of Ogre Power, the way it's set up, it's just an item. And we're going to look at the active effects. That's what active effects are, this effects tab here. And you can see this is currently inactive, and it's set to, and it's just called Superhuman Strength. And if I open this up, this is the effect right here. First of all, the effect is suspended. That's why it says it's inactive on that other window. Secondly, apply effect to actor. I mentioned this specifically. You do want to have this checked if it's going to be immediately applying an effect to the wearer. So that would be checked. If it's a type of thing where it's triggered against someone else, you would actually want to uncheck that. We'll talk about that more in a little bit here. But for now, this is one where you're wearing the gauntlets and they immediately apply to you as the wearer. There is no duration because this is always on when they're being worn. So this is all empty here. And when we go to the changes, these are the modifications that are being done to your character. So you see the strength, the attack mod, it becomes +2, and it's overriding everything. So what this is doing is it's giving the character the benefits of an 18 strength, regardless of what their actual strength is and what is Argyros' strength. His is 16, so you can see he's got +1, +1, 3, and 24. So this is going to override those benefits, those modifiers, without actually changing the strength value from 16 to 18. It's going to leave the 16 there, but it's going to change those modifiers. I could add another row here that changes his strength to 18, but I believe the item description just says that it applies, it says it applies the benefits of an 18 strength. So that's how I interpreted that description. So we're going to, it overrides, so it replaces the existing values with these ones which are for an 18 strength. And it does those as soon as they're equipped. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this over onto Argyros. I had not done so yet, so we'll drag the Gauntlets of Ogre Power over here, and there they are. And you can see they're equipped right off the bat. And so we should immediately see, oh, I might need to just do, let's see now. Sometimes you just need to do this really quick, unequip and re-equip. There we go. Yep, that's all I had to do. Sometimes things get out of sync on that, but all I did was unequip and re-equip the item by clicking the little bag icon, okay? And what that does, if you saw in the chat, you can see that the system disables the superhuman strength and unequips or drops the gauntlets. He didn't literally drop them, but he unequipped them. And then it re-enables it as he's re-equipping that. So you get two messages when you're equipping an item that has an effect. You get the message of the effect being applied and the item itself, the message of the item itself being equipped. So having said, blathered on about that long enough, you get the +2, +3, 5, and 32, as I was talking about. So no spell required there. It's just an always on effect. And if we look at the effects here, you can see he's got superhuman strength. And I can't actually edit these. I can't delete it. I can't remove it. You can see it's all because it's being managed by an item, not by the actor himself. I would actually have to go to the item over here and go to Gauntlets of Ogre Power, and I could, you can see it's now a passive. I could hit the X and that would disable it. You can also, and this is actually the better way of doing it, just to manage this, is if you want to take the gloves off and remove that benefit, just unequip it. You can see I hit that bag button there. You can see we got 2 new messages. The superhuman strength has now been disabled, and he dropped or removed the Gauntlets of Ogre Power. And you can see that his strength modifiers are back to what they normally would be for a strength of 16. And if we go back and re-equip the gauntlets, you saw the messages in the chat, and once again we're back to the modifiers for an 18 strength equivalent. So that's the best way, I think, to do items that apply active effects to the wearer or owner of an item, is just put them right on the item like that, as I showed. We'll just go back there one more time here. Gauntlets, we're in the effects tab already, so just click that, and then you can add an effect and do what you need to do. I'll delete that, but if we edit this one, you can see, just give it a name. You can even change the icon, which I've done in many cases, but just not, this is the default icon. I just left it alone. Apply the effect to the actor, yes. Effect suspended, no, by default. And you've got all these here. By the way, this here was the problem why it didn't actually enable right away, because I had it suspended when he dragged it on. So it's out of sync because the effect was suspended, but when I dragged the item to the character sheet, it showed up as being equipped. Really, what you want to do when you're defining the item is, it's a funny thing, but if I go here, attributes, carried, this is the equipped flag. So if I'm going to have this checked, I also want to have the effect suspended not checked. That means the effect is going to be enabled as soon as the item is on them. Because it was checked when we initially dragged that on, it got it out of sync. The other option is I could have this be not carried by default and leave this suspended by default. That way it keeps it in sync once again, because I dragged the item to his sheet. It's not enabled initially, therefore the effect is not applied. As soon as he enables, or as soon as he equips the item by hitting that bag icon, right? Right here, if I click the bag icon, first of all, so let's just do that. Now you're going to see that checkbox is now checked. It wasn't checked a second ago. It is now. That didn't change in the visual things, but I think, yes, it is effective or in effect here. It's on. So hopefully that's making sense. Just be aware that if you're going to have the item, going back here, if you're going to have it carried by default, that is to say equipped by default, then you want to make sure the effect is not suspended. If you're going to have it unequipped by default, which honestly for a new item, I would recommend leaving it unequipped by default, because you don't know if a player or character is going to put on those gloves right away. Especially magic items, they're not identified. Ergo, the character may not put them on right away, and even if they put them on, you may want, as a GM, you may want to have some special things in mind for how the item responds when it's first put on or something like that. So, to keep the magic mystery alive, leave the carried option turned off, so it's not equipped by default when it's dragged to the character sheet, and then have the suspended thing checked, because of course that way it doesn't try to apply the item as soon as it's dragged to the character sheet. And now this is in sync, not carried, suspended, yes, that is in sync, that's correct. So that would be the best practice I find. So that talks about passive or always on active effects coming from an item. Let's see. Another possibility is the active effect might be temporary. So it's not passive, always on. It's temporary, on for a fixed period of time. Maybe it's random, but it's once the random die roll has been done, it's a fixed number. So it's got a calculated duration. And if in that case, then there's a couple more sub-questions. First of all, you have to ask yourself, is the active effect automatically applied via a successful attack? For example, persistent damage or damage over time. So you might have a weapon that causes bleeding damage for an extra round or two after a successful attack, or it causes fire damage for an extra round or two on a successful attack. And the way you would set that up is, the best practice, again, would be to put the active effect directly on the item. Do not have the apply effect to actor checkbox checked, because you don't want to apply it to the person who's using the weapon. You're going to apply it to the target of the attack. So you don't want that checkbox checked. And then on a successful attack, the chat log, this chat bar over here on the right side, will actually have a button to apply the persistent damage. So as an example, I believe Argyros has some incendiary oil, not magical, but does have persistent damage. So when I look at this, you're going to see it does 1d8, basic burning damage, right? And then if we go to the effects, you've got burning oil as persistent damage, and it is set up with a duration of one additional round. I've talked about turns versus rounds in the past. Essentially, in my mind, well, a round is the round that it triggers on the character's turn, or the character's action, if you will. Actually, I have that reversed now. The turn is the character's action within the round, but the round is like triggers at the end of a given round. So I generally leave these as the same numbers when I'm setting up temporary effects. I'm not going to go into more about that because there's ways you can do it that are different, and it's just a whole different conversation. But suffice to say, this is burning oil. It burns for one extra round after the target is struck. So they take that initial D8 damage, but then they take some persistent damage. And the way you do persistent damage in Hyperborea, so this is a feature in Hyperborea, is you set up this attribute key, system.temp persistent damage, with a capital P and a capital D in the middle there. So that's how it has to be spelled. Set this to add, and then you give it the type of damage, like burning, a comma, and then the dice to roll, which can also be a fixed number. You can just put like a 2 there or something, that's fine. Or a dice roll, like a 1d8, and then end it with a semicolon. And the system will interpret that so it knows that it has to apply 1d8 burning damage for one additional round to the target. And then at the end of that extra round, this effect is actually disabled on the target automatically. So the system handles that for you, which is why it's nice to have it pre-configured on your items. So when you set up incendiary oil for your players, you being the GM, you set this up for your players to be able to use, and it's in your little, it's in your folder of items, maybe not magic items, but maybe it's under equipment or whatever. They can drag it to their character sheet, and this is all built in and ready to go. And the also thing, incidentally, with incendiary oil, of course, that is a grenade-like item, so you want to check this box. Because that actually causes the item to attack as a hurled item from table 143 of the player's manual, as it says right there, meaning that the person is still rolling a d20, but the attack roll is essentially the same as it would be for a missile weapon. However, it's not rolling versus the target's AC. It's rolling on an internal table, this table 143, to determine whether you hit the square where your target stands or not. And that's generally easier than actually hitting the AC of the target. So when I then make an attack roll, and I'm actually going to target something, so I'm going to target this guy here. So you can see I've got Argyros right here. I'll even move him up so he's closer. So he's in, actually I think we're in medium range there. We're 10 feet away. This is targeted. So, bring this up here. Didn't mean to do that. We're going to do the incendiary oil, so I'm just going to do the attack roll. Oops, it's not equipped, my fault. So we'll equip it, and we'll make the roll. You can see attack with a thrown flask. So we're going to go ahead and do, and it's short range, within 10 feet. So we're going to do the roll. I'm going to just make sure I hit. We look at the chat. So you see it says it hits. We'll roll the damage. And then, of course, as the GM, I can apply that damage. So I'm going to... So this is the apply damage right here. So I'm going to apply the 6 damage, which it just subtracted 6 from him automatically. You can see his hit point bar has reduced a little bit. Then apply the burning oil. This is the active effect. So I'm going to apply it. You can see it added burning oil. And if I untarget him, you can see he's got a little fire icon in the upper left corner there. And if I open him up, he's got burning oil right there. And you can see it shows duration of 1 turn. And there, you know, that whole effect that I was just showing you guys, it's right there. So the system now will handle this at the end of his turn. It's going to see if he has any active effect of the orc's turn. It's going to see if the orc has any active effects on him. And if he does, which he does, it will then roll that d8 and apply some additional burning oil damage. I'm not going to demonstrate that. I've demonstrated it before. It works. But, you know, so that's how that works. So that would be an item that has an effect that applies to someone else automatically on an attack. You could do this with spells like Acid Arrow, which does some additional acid damage in the following round, persistent acid damage. And in fact, in the compendium, I have the Acid Arrow set up that way to do extra acid damage in a following round. You can do that with items like a Flame Tongue Sword, which I think actually technically the Flame Tongue Sword does not do persistent burning damage. But if you wanted to homebrew that, you could say it does an extra, you know, 1d4 burning damage for 1 round or something like that. I actually have a homebrew Flame Brand, not the Flame Tongue Sword. This is my homebrew Flame Brand on Argyros, and it does in fact have that. You can see I even put homebrew in the description. But it has the standard damage. It's a +2 sword, and on the effects, it does burning damage. I think I set it up for 1d4. Yep, 1d4 fire damage for an additional 3 rounds. So again, totally homebrew, but this is what I did for this magic sword. So it strikes someone, and then it continues to do 1d4 burning damage for 3 extra rounds on the target so struck. So it's kind of fun. So that's that. That's how you would do it. Okay, so backing out, thinking about items, we're still in the category of items that have temporary active effects, like persistent damage or whatever. Might be something else. It might be something different. So the sort of first sub-question was, is the active effect automatically applied via a successful attack, as we've now discussed? The second sub-question would be, is the active effect triggered manually by the item owner? So some examples, you might have an item that grants the owner temporary hit points. This could be a potion. I mean, honestly, it could be the aid spell, which grants, I believe, 1d8 temporary hit points to the recipient, even above what their maximum hit points normally would be. So it can be spells. It can be potions or any other item that does that. It might do a temporary move modifier, like Boots of Speed or Boots of Haste, whatever they're called. I believe they're not always on. You have to like tap your heels together and that triggers it, similar to a haste spell, and it's for a limited period of time. So you would do it like that. Also, possibly something that triggers a temporary armor class or damage reduction modifier. For example, the shield spell does this temporary effect for a magician to obviously change their armor class and improve it from what they normally would be completely unarmored. So you might also have things that are temporary, like token statuses, like invisible or stunned or prone, that might apply these. These could be weapons that apply these effects or spells or whatever it happens to be. So for the best practice for these types of situations or these types of cases is to create a custom spell for the item, or use an existing spell if it really is a spell, and have the active effect on the spell. Again, do not check that apply effects to actor checkbox, because it's not going to work anyway since it's coming from a spell. Since the effect is on the spell or the item. Then you, on the item that owns the spell, you're going to enable has spells on the item. We're going to show you all of this. I'm saying it verbally, but we're really going to go through it. So let's actually just start to go through it. It'll make more sense if you can see it, I think. So if we look at, for example, Boots of Levitation, we'll use this. I know this is a good one. So these soft leather boots impart the ability to levitate as the spell at caster ability 10. Okay, and you can do it 3 times a day, and there's no charges on this. It's just always on, not always on, but always available 3 times a day. No charge use. So best practice again is you're going to go in here. you're going to say has spells. You're going to check that box right there. Okay. That actually triggers the appearance of this spells tab, which is not normally there on an item. This spells tab only appears when you check has spells. So here I have simply dragged the levitate spell out of my compendium and onto the item. And you can see it's got a casting ability of 10, as is described right here, casting ability 10. And there's no charges, so I leave those blank. You don't want to put a 0 there. That actually confuses the system because it sees a numeric value. Just leave it blank if not used. That's why I have the note there, just to avoid confusion. And that's the item. And if you want to look at the levitate spell, you can hit the little eyeball here. And this is the levitate spell as it is in my compendium. And as I mentioned, we put the levitation effect on the spell, not on the item. Now you could put it on the item if you wanted. This is one of those, I can skin this cat multiple ways type of situations. In fact, I have it here because I was fiddling around with things. Normally you would not have it both on a spell attached to the item and on the item itself. So this is actually bad data, if you will. But you could do it this way. You could put the levitation effect as a temporary effect, and you could say it's got a duration of 1 round or whatever you want here. You can see, again, bad data because I should have a number in turns as well if this was really a valid setup. And then changes is nothing because you're not really changing any attributes of the character. You're just giving them levitation. And in this case, we're applying to the actor. You do this because it's coming directly from the item. But for the spell, I was just showing you something that's actually not valid. Let's go back to the spell. For the spell levitation, we'll look at this effect. So we've got the duration of 180 rounds because the levitation spell actually has quite a lengthy duration, 1 turn per CA, and the CA is 10, remember, from the boots themselves. So we've got 10 turns of duration for levitation here. So that's a lot of rounds. So we give it a nice long set of rounds and turns here. Remember, this is not a Hyperborea game turn. This is a character turn within the round. So it's this is a Foundry term, not a Hyperborea term. And then changes, again, nothing, because we're not doing anything to the character like giving them increased strength or changing their AC or anything like that. So that's left alone. All we have is the duration. And on details, oh yeah, I did set the status here of flying. There's no hovering. At least I don't think there is. I'm going to be embarrassed because if I find hovering, there is hovering right there. So really, I should change that to hovering, get rid of flying. That's what I should have done for levitation. My bad. So you set that hovering. You can see I changed the icon to winged boots just because I thought it was kind of fun. And I'll go ahead and save that. And that's on the spell. Again, there it is right there. And the spell is on the item. And when the item is worn, which I think maybe Artemisia is wearing them. Yes, she has boots of levitation now. Let me see. This boots here is not the same as we were just looking at over here. So let's see how this is configured. Just kind of figuring this out as we go here. So we do have has spells, obviously. We have the levitate spell here. I have 0 there. Now that 0 is harmless. This is the one up here that confuses the system if you have numbers. But I can actually blank that. And in fact, in my mind, the best practice is if you're not using charges, leave them all blank. Don't even leave any 0s in there anywhere. So that's best practice right there. If I look at this levitate spell, again, we've got this levitation. I'm going to do this. We've got hovering because, again, that was coming from the compendium, which I was just editing a second ago. So it's actually fixed across the board since this is just a pointer to the compendium spell. So we've now got that set up. So that's good. And again, we go here. He's got the casting ability of 10, which is what we want. There's nothing under effects because it's the spell that has the effect. And on the Boots of Levitation now, because it's got spells on it, this little wand button appears. That's brand new with the has spells capability in Hyperborea. So most items, they don't have that wand. But if the item has the ability to cast spells, it's got this wand. And the reason I did that was to keep it separate from the default action that would fall under the icon image, like with weapons typically. Because you might have any staff, theoretically, could be set up as a quarterstaff. That is a weapon. So it has to have its default action is the attack roll. But the staff might also have spells like a Staff of Power. So sure, The magician could use it as a quarterstaff and smack someone upside the head with it as the default action, but they're also going to be wanting to use the wand to cast the spell, a spell from the staff, probably the majority of the time. So cast spell levitate, that's the default action because there is only one spell on this item. So if there were multiple spells, we would actually get a different dialogue with a select spell prompt and a drop-down list of all the spells that are on that item. But we just have the one, so it's going to cast levitate. I'm going to click cast, and what happens is over in the chat, it sends the description over here, and you can see you can apply the levitation effect now. The GM can apply this to anyone, but the player can also apply it to themselves as long as they have their tokens selected. So with Artemisia selected, she's wearing the boots. As a player, I can click apply levitation. You can see she just gained the levitation effect, which is now right here as levitation. And of course, it's actually on the token itself. So if I go under here, you can see the winged boot hovering right there. So she's got that hovering effect on her token status as well as the actual effect on her character sheet tab, effects tab. And that's how you do that is, again, you start from the item, you add spells to that item. Going into items, boots of levitation, you go has spells, then you add the spell to it, and the spell should have the effects on it, and that all sort of just cascades down to the character when the time comes to actually use the ability. Okay? Hopefully that all made sense. It gets a little complicated, but once you've done it a couple of times, you'll start to see the logic of it, and it starts to make more sense. Let's see. So you can do that with any number of things. In this case, I was doing this token status of adding the hovering status with the wing boots, but you can do this with effects like temporary hit points, like I said, like an aid spell, or temporary move modifier like boots of speed or anything like that, where they might actually be affecting different abilities on the character as a temporary effect. Same type of situation. Put the haste spell on the boots if it's boots of speed. Just put the haste spell on the boots, and if the haste spell has the movement modifiers as part of its active effects, again, that all cascades back to the actor when they click their boot heels together. Okay, so that was that for active effects being either always on or temporary. So if we back out a step now, another question to ask yourself is, does the item have one or more spells or spell-like powers that it can cast? Now, we've sort of already talked about that a little bit, like the Boots of Levitation, which is a spell or spell-like power that it casts. But you might also have something like an actual Staff of Power that has multiple spells on it. Now, does he have one equipped? He has a Wand of Fireballs, which is a simple version. So Andronakos, my magician, has a Wand of Fireballs. And if I look at this, so the best practice here is, again, you're going to set up has spells under the attributes. Then under spells, you're going to drag the spell over from your compendium. And in this case, this item has charges. So we give the casting ability of 9 because that came from the definition of a Wand of Fireballs, which has CA9 ability, casting ability of 9. And of course, the definition is it contains the Fireball spell. So all we got to do is drag the Fireball spell from the compendium over here onto the sheet, the item sheet. As a GM, you define the number of charges, its maximum charges, and more importantly, how many charges it currently has, and the charge cost to cast this spell. Fireball is just one charge, and that's it. We'll do a Staff of Power or a Staff of Magus or something in a second, so you can see a more complicated. But this is the simplest way to set this up. And now with this set up like this, as my Andronakos, Wand of Fireballs, I want to show you something else too, by the way. I just unequipped. Sorry, I didn't disable it, but I did unequip it, which effectively disabled my ability to use it. So with it being unequipped, now when I tap this, you can see Wand of Fireballs is not equipped. So I have to equip it, which sort of puts it in my hand, as it were. Now I can cast the Wand of Fireballs. I'm sorry, cast Fireball from the wand. Cast spell Fireball. So I cast the spell, and remember it's a CA9, so it's going to do 96 damage. So, by the way, I've got Andronakos is a magician of CA4, but the system sees the CA9 of the item, and that's what carries through to the spell when it's being cast. So I can roll the 96 damage, targets can all roll their sorcery saves, and away we go. And that's how that works. Now a more complicated one, and actually I will drag it to Andronakos' character sheet. So let's go back into items here. And I believe I had, Staff of Power. So we'll just drag this over here. Now, Staff of Power, I already mentioned, staves are pretty much quarterstaffs. You may not want to interpret all staves that way, but for the Staff of Power I did, because I believe it even does function as a +1 quarterstaff, +2 quarterstaff actually right there. So I set it up as a weapon, okay? So now this is going to talk a little bit about what I had previously mentioned. I dragged it onto the sheet. It shows up under weapons, Staff of Power. Oh, I also have Staff of Mages and another Staff of Power. So they were already there. So you know what? I'm going to delete this one because that's the one that was just added, which is why it was not equipped. But I've got Staff of Power and Staff of the Mages both set up here. Staff of Mages is, let's see. That one doesn't say it's actually a quarterstaff, but I just chose to interpret it that way. So I'm not going to worry about the Mages one, but for the Staff of Power, we know it is set up as a +2 quarterstaff, and it's got some spells on it. So when we look at the staff, the array of spell-like powers at CA 11, so we need to know that. And let's see, and then it's got a Strike of Retribution power, same as the Staff of Mages, so that's something to be aware of. Let's see, and you can also expend 1 or 2 charges to double or triple the damage dice on a successful melee attack. So we've got a couple of interesting things going on here. So first of all, I had to go in here, I had to click Has Spells, right? Then I got to go to Spells. Now Staff of Power has a number of spells. All of these are part of the definition of a Staff of Power, from Cone of Cold all the way down through Globe of Invulnerability. Lots of cool stuff here. And you can see the charge costs are different. Most of them are 1, but the Globe of Invulnerability Lesser is 2, and the Greater Globe is 3, has a charge cost of 3. In addition, I could have actually added, in fact, is it on this one? Maybe I did it on this one. Nope, it's not on there. Apparently I was doing some testing earlier where I actually had created some custom spells to handle the things like spending charges to do double and triple damage. But we're not going to worry about that for the moment. Suffice to say, you've got all these spells on here, because what I really wanted to show is this setup with the different charge costs. Again, you fill in the CA here and the number of charges and maximum and all that. And of course, it's set up as a +2 quarterstaff, so he can actually use it as a melee weapon. And now, since it's under combat here, Andronakos can either choose to attack, make a melee attack with the standard default action of mousing over the item icon, and you get an attack. And when I do the attack, let's just make it that, and of course I rolled that, and so you can see here it's got an item attack modifier of +2 because it says it's +2 here, and that's how I have it defined. And then it's got Andronakos' fighting ability of 1, and of course that's it. It does the attack, and then the damage is d6 +2 plus -1. That -1 is because his strength really is lousy, so he actually has a -1 penalty to melee weapon damage. And I can roll that damage, and we'll roll something, and it applies it. So again, item damage mod +2 because it's acting as a +2 quarterstaff minus your strength, and you end up with it partially cancels it out, so you end up with 4 hit points after rolling a natural 3. Okay, so the other thing though is, again, you've got that wand icon. So now here I click this, and you remember I said if there's multiple spells, you're going to get a choose spell option. That's this. So now I've got a drop down of all the spells I can choose. Let's say he wants to choose or cast a lesser globe of invulnerability. Now let's just pop this open real quick, because I believe that uses 2 charges. Yes, 2 charges. And he currently is at 18, so it should drop to 16 when he casts the spell. So I'm going to hit cast, no attack roll required, so I'm going to cast the spell. There it is. And now when I go back into my Staff of Power, his charges are 16. It's been deducted for us automatically, so you're good to go there. And of course, you've got this globe of invulnerability here that has this definition to say what it does. And if this spell had active effects that would apply to the actor, I would have a button to apply those effects as well. This spell doesn't happen to have that. It's just something to be cognizant of, that the caster or recipient of the spell has protection from first through third level spells, etc., as the definition of the spell goes. Just as well, I can that was from Magus, but it doesn't really matter, I guess. Staff of Power. I can also do Cone of Cold, which does not require an attack roll. So you can do that. You can see again, it's going to roll the CA 11, so it's 11d4 plus 11 damage. And of course, the save for the targets of said spell. It's an area of effect, so there's no attack roll required. I'm not sure if there's any spells in here that do require an attack roll, but you would get one if it had it. Does Ray of Enfeeblement? Maybe? Nope, no attack roll on that one either. Well, probably none of them have that, but again, if the spell requires an attack roll, let's say it had Acid Arrow in it, like you have a wand of acid arrows or something, you would actually be required to make an attack roll because the spell requires that, and then assuming you hit, you could apply the damage. And of course, Acid Arrow has persistent damage, so that effect would be applied and all that, again, cascading through. So that pretty much talks about all the magic item possibilities that I wanted to discuss. Again, you've got different types of options. You've got items that have a bonus to themselves, weapons and armor typically. Theoretically, you could have another item that's not a weapon or an armor, but has some sort of item check with a bonus on it. But those weapons and armor are certainly the most common, where they apply modifiers to themselves, and you just apply them directly on the item definition. Then you've got items that cause one or more active effects, and under that sort of heading is the subheadings. Passive effects, those are always on, where you just put the effect right on the item and just let it apply directly to the wearer or carrier of said item. Or you've got effects that are temporary and may apply to the wearer, or they may actually apply to someone else. Usually it's to the wearer, like a Ring of Invisibility or Boots of Levitation or whatever it happens to be, or items. If it's someone else, it's often an effect that takes effect on a successful attack, like the Incendiary Oil, as I demonstrated, or the Flame Tongue in my homebrew setup, or even the Acid Arrow spell, which again has that persistent damage that takes effect on a successful hit. Let's see, then you've also got the effect that might be triggered manually by the item owner. Again, typically a temporary effect. Well, it's pretty much always a temporary effect if it has to be triggered manually. It's not going to be always on permanently ever after that. It's just going to be on for a period of time. And that would be the Boots of Levitation that I demonstrated. Again, it could be a Ring of Invisibility, or it could be Boots of Flying that have a limited duration on it, whatever it happens to be. Boots of Speed, all those kinds of things. And then finally, you've got the question is, does the item have one or more spells or spell-like powers that it can cast? And again, then you would just hit that has spells checkbox and apply those to the item. Okay, folks, hope that helps you GMs out there who are creating and defining magic items for your campaigns and wondering if there's any way to, what the best way is to configure these things so that some of these powers and abilities are automatically there for the players to be able to use. This is how you do it. And by the way, if you remember, items can be identified or unidentified. That is to say, not identified. So when you do that, if I do the unidentified checkbox like that, from a player's perspective now, they will not be able to see the spells either, nor will they be able to see the effects. So if this is a magic item that has these abilities, all that stuff disappears. So that is sort of built into the identified, unidentified flag. So when someone does find a magic item, if they have no idea what it is and it's just this mysterious gold ring with no markings on it, which I think a Ring of Invisibility might be exactly that. Yeah, simple gold band. So if I have it not identified, they're going to see this description down there, and that's all they see. They're not going to see any spells like invisibility here. Certainly not going to see any effects if they were on there, which there aren't, but there's the spells. They're just going to know it's a simple gold band. And then cast identify or whatever, they figure out what it is. Then as a GM, you can check that box because players don't have access to that box. As a GM, you can check that box on their character sheet, and now they know what the ring is and what it does. Okay? All right, enough said. Have a great day, folks. Happy adventuring in Hyperborea, And this is Dave signing off.